stories are powerful and needed for the world. It took a pandemic like this for us to think. I have focused on using my art as a tool.
Because the opportunities are vast.
And we have a crucial moment on which to engage in that study right now.
I'm your host here, Chebs. Welcome to Unfiltered. Let's get started. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered. I'm your host, Chebs.
As much as we share each other's perspectives, we have the opportunity to learn from one another.
Our stories are powerful and needed for the world. It took a pandemic like this for us to think. I have focused on using my art as a tool.
Because the opportunities are vast.
And we have a crucial moment on which to engage in that study right now.
I'm your host here, Chebs. Welcome to Unfiltered. Let's get started. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered. I'm your host, Chebs.
As much as we share each other's perspectives, we have the opportunity to learn from one another.
Our stories are powerful and needed for the world. It took a pandemic like this for us to think. I have focused on using my art as a tool.
Because the opportunities are vast.
And we have a crucial moment on which to engage in that study right now.
I'm your host here, Chebs. Welcome to Unfiltered. Let's get started. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another episode of Unfiltered. I'm your host, Chebs.
As much as we share each other's perspectives, we have the opportunity to learn from one another.
Our stories are powerful and needed for the world. It took a pandemic like this for us to think. I have focused on using my art as a tool.
Because the opportunities are vast.
And we have a crucial moment on which to engage in that study right now.
I'm your host here, Chebs. Welcome to Unfiltered. Let's get started. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening to our European friend. Good to have you all on. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Unfiltered. And in a moment, we're gonna get to know ourselves a little bit, but I just wanted to let our guests and our viewers out there know that we have a formidable panel, and our formidable co-host Lisa is going to take us through this episode. But I wanted to introduce the show. This is Unfiltered. You know how we do on this show. We talk about anything and everything, and our goal is to bring the world to having more conversations than we do right now. And so thank you all for joining. You know what to do: like, share, start a watch party, call on your friends to come and watch this very powerful conversation and participate and join the conversation. Lisa, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and you can introduce our wonderful panelists, and then we can roll from there.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chebs, for having us all. Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Cameron. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm very excited to be co-hosting today's talk show with Chebs, featuring 3 bad boss survivors, all with different but very compelling bad boss stories. I've had many bad bosses. I've faced everything from gender discrimination to sexual harassment, enormous amounts of unpaid overtime, wrongful dismissal. I've been misclassified as an independent contractor. I've worked on short-term contracts, hired through temp agencies, and more. And at a point, while I did villainize each individual boss, and in some cases took action against them, I realized something important, which is that, in my opinion, there is something fundamentally wrong with the way that work is structured, and that bosses so often abuse the enormous power that they hold over us. As a union organizer and labor activist, I've also been on the receiving end of many worker complaints. So I have some sense of how pervasive these workplace problems are, but not everybody gets this opportunity, and therefore, no doubt, so many workers feel isolated in their struggle. Basically, I understand that not everyone identifies with broad labor goals or expresses their anger and sadness politically, but I also understand that almost everyone has had a bad boss. This is the lowest common denominator, so to speak. And for this particular project, bad bosses and storytelling is the starting point. So the goal of this particular project is to simply help us as workers realize that our struggle is collective and hopefully see that the solution is collective as well. I personally take a lot of inspiration from the Me Too movement. Dealing with the impacts of sexual assault can be so isolating. Many feel like it's their fault, that they did something wrong. And when survivors came out and shared their stories, I think something important happened. It gave people the opportunity to realize that they were not alone, that the problem was systemic. And I think that hearing folks speak out empowered others to do the same. And the more and more people who share their stories and continue to share their stories, the louder the movement becomes. And although the issue of bad bosses is different, and I recognize that, I want to ask, like, how many of us feel alone in our workplace struggle and feel responsible for the ways that our bosses abuse us? How many of us cry on the way home from work? How many of us are losing sleep because we dread facing our boss the next day? And how many of us worry that one wrong move on the job may render them unable to afford rent, buy groceries, afford childcare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? The thing is that bosses have so much control, and when their power is abused, the consequences for us as workers can be enormous. Quickly, the tagline of My Bad Boss is "Your supportive unofficial coworker," and that's because I want to recreate that feeling that we all get when the bad boss leaves the room. That sigh of relief, or that opportunity to laugh with your coworkers, roll your eyes, cry, or feel supportive. And I want to give people an opportunity to learn what I feel is the most important lesson here, which is that we're not alone, that we are in this together, and that in that sense, we are all coworkers. Because we all know that when workers talk, change happens. So I want to jump into the interview section. I hope I didn't talk too fast. Before we get started, can each speaker just quickly identify themselves and your pronouns? Starting with Charlie.
Hi, I'm Charlie. I go by they, them.
Johanna.
Hi, my name's Johanna. I identify as she, her.
And Kelsey.
My name's Kelsey, and I identify as she, her as well. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Kelsey. Chebs?
Yes, this is Chebs, and I identify as he and him.
Awesome. Sorry. So let's start with Joanna. Funny enough, and I actually used to be coworkers for a really bad boss at a clothing store in Kingston, Ontario. So Joanna, I would love for you to just share your bad boss story and tell us what you did trying to deal with your bad boss.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for having me. It's been so long now, and yet I still have bad dreams about this place because it still rattles me to this day how this ever happened, how this was ever allowed to go down the way it did. I was an assistant manager at this clothing store. I'd been working there about 3 years at the time. I really liked the job for the most part. I didn't have to deal with the bosses too much until towards the end of my time there. But I really liked it. I'd taken a semester off from school at the time. I really loved my coworkers. Most of them were students. I really loved the visual merchandising part. So I've always really considered myself a creative person. I still do. And I really liked working with clothes and fashion. So I love making the store, like I said, as confusing. I loved playing dress up with customers. They were all about sales goals, but I did pretty well there because I liked picking outfits for different people. And I was a very competent manager and a good team leader. I wasn't really assisting anybody at the time. And I started reaching the end of my rope around the time of this event. I'd already felt pretty undervalued, not to mention severely underpaid. In addition to being their manager, I was also their in-house seamstress. I would sew clothes back together both at my store and for their other stores. So they clearly expected a lot from me, but didn't pay me more than around $12 an hour at the time. I don't remember how much it was, but it couldn't have been much more than that. It's certainly less than $12.50. But I planned on continuing to work there when the fall semester started. So basically what happened the day before that this alarm had gone off, I wasn't feeling well, but we didn't really have a lot of people working there. So I went into work the next day. But even the day before, when I was feeling sick, the boss had gone so far as to follow me to the bathroom and continue to bark orders at me from the other side of the bathroom door. So I went in the next day, mostly because there were no key holders available to close. I never went home sick, but this day I was really unwell. I was sick during my shift, so that was where I drew the line. and they had one of their key holders from one of their other stores come and close the store so I could go home. I lived really close to the store at the time, otherwise I probably wouldn't have agreed to what had happened next. The store was closed for less than an hour when I got a call from one of the bad bosses. She told me that a smoke alarm had gone off, but because they were having dinner at Wolf Island at the time, they couldn't make it back. So they asked me to go over to the store and check to make sure it wasn't on fire. I told them I'd be right there. I was there in less than 5 minutes, but still the other bad boss, there's two of them, they were a couple, had called me to ask why it was taking so long. I told them everything seemed fine from the outside. There were also apartments directly above the store and no one had evacuated. There were no fire trucks outside, so we figured we could rule out a fire. So he told me to go inside, so I did. Now this is when he tells me that the security company had told him that all of the alarms had gone off, not just the smoke alarm. The lights wouldn't turn on, the power to the alarm was cut. So at this point, I was pretty scared. He told me to go into the back room, smell for smoke and gas, shout hello. I was already pretty loud on the phone, but had shouted, no one answered. I reminded him that carbon monoxide didn't have a smell, but I didn't smell smoke. And I said I shouldn't be in here if you're expecting a carbon monoxide leak, but he totally ignored that. And I was already in the back room at this point. So what started as going to check the store, make sure it's not on fire, quickly escalated to go and put yourself into a potentially very dangerous, if not deadly situation. They waited until I got there to tell me that it wasn't just a smoke alarm. They hadn't called 911. They didn't call the police for backup or to escort me in, something which I'm sure they absolutely would have done free of charge. They just called their sick 21-year-old assistant store manager to go in and deal with this problem alone. So I was pretty terrified. I used a flashlight on my phone, figured out what the problem was. At the other store, the way they switched their lights off either resembles or is next to the fuse panel. So the employee who closed the store shut the fuses off, which made all of the alarms go off shortly after he had left. So I was pretty happy with myself for having figured out what the problem was, but then the bad boss had immediately started berating me on the phone. He said the security company was going to charge them hundreds of dollars for the false alarm, and I told him that wasn't my problem. Turned the fuses back on, reset the alarm, and went home. The next day, I got a call from the other bad boss asking me to have a meeting with her to discuss what had happened. So at this point, I was pretty scared, and I'd also felt very betrayed. These people knew I was vulnerable because I was broke. I was a student. I needed the income, and it paid slightly above minimum wage. So they took advantage of me. Didn't want to lose my job, and I didn't want to find work in a town which was known for having been hit pretty hard with the recession. All of downtown Kingston was pretty much a ghost town. Stores were closing all the time. New ones never lasted long. So I was scared, but I was also very angry. These people would go on about how they were parents, how they look after their employees because things happen when you have children. But I was also somebody's child. I'm also barely an adult myself at that point. I'm somebody's daughter too. So I felt very lied to and also very ashamed of myself for having given so much of my time and effort to people who would, at the drop of a hat, put me in such a risky situation. So the bad boss was very hostile with me during this meeting. I told her this wasn't the first time they'd overstepped the boundary and how just the day before her partner had basically followed me to the bathroom while I wasn't feeling well to keep shouting orders at me, which seemed to surprise her and also make her even more angry. I demanded an apology for the reckless endangerment. She asked me if I wanted to keep working for them or if I wanted to quit. I said I didn't want to quit, but I wasn't comfortable with what had happened and I'd wanted an apology and a guarantee that this would never happen again. And I wasn't comfortable working for people who would so quickly put my safety on the line. So she fired me. She said that I'd quit, but that clearly wasn't the case. They backed me into a corner and used my word choice against me. I told them if they were firing me, I demand severance, and then I would be taking this to the Ministry of Labor for their violation of my safety. And she told me to go ahead and try, but they had people there. And of course, I never got the severance. So I filed a complaint with the ministry, and eventually a rep called me. They told me that they had an audio recording of the conversation that the boss had given them, and that I had clearly stated on that recording that I had quit. So he was basically laughing at me and intimidating me. He told me I couldn't press charges or take it any further because the complaint had been denied by the ministry and that I wasn't entitled to any severance. I said that whether I fired or quit seemed pretty irrelevant, considering they knowingly and willingly put me in danger. And he said that didn't matter because at the end of the day, there was no serious threat. I asked that they at least send a representative from the ministry to check the store, but to my knowledge, that never happened. And if they had really taken an audio recording, that it would have been clear that I was being backed into a corner and they were trying to gaslight me into admitting that this was somehow my fault. So she said to me, of course, if they had an inside man at the ministry, if that was the case, that also would have been on the recording. But I know that she was familiar enough with how to use her phone to be able to edit that, so it wouldn't have been hard for her to take that part out. So I felt very betrayed by my employers. The ministry that was supposed to be in place to protect me had clearly sided with them, sided with the employers who would put me in a dangerous situation and also tried to intimidate me about it. I know I wasn't the only person who's ever filed a complaint against these people and had it go nowhere. So despite it being years later, I'm very grateful right now. I currently live in Finland. I am a doctoral student here. I get paid as a researcher. And I know that no one here will ever put me in a situation like that with very strict ethics. But still, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to get to talk about this because it still irks me to this day that they were able to get away with it.
Wow. I mean, I remember working there and knowing a little bit about that happening. Actually, I wasn't there at the time. I had also been fired. This boss was definitely out of control. One thing though, I just want a clarification on, Joe, you mentioned when you submitted your story that they actually tried to stick the bill, the security bill on.
Yes, they had. The person who had actually closed the store that day was like, they're trying to do this to me too. The other employee they had some connection with either like a labor lawyer or something who was like, they have no right to try to put that bill on you. So that seemed to work, whatever that in was there. So they dropped that pretty quickly. But they were also going through this weird phase of like, kind of almost culling out all of their most loyal employees. Like all of their managers had either quit or been fired at that point. I think I was the last one. And actually the store ended up closing a few months later. So I'm sure that they probably just didn't sign the lease and were trying to find a way to get rid of some of their employees. And it was just a shame that I ended up being one of them.
Yeah, that's so awful. And I know this particular boss even still has, support local businesses and, kind of like friendly messaging all over their store. Joe, you and I have talked about kind of some of those small business rhetoric and how it can kind of insulate bad bosses who run small businesses from any kind of recourse or bad publicity.
Yeah, and what really should have raised some red flags to me is that their kind of number two, their sort of general manager, had said to me before all of this went down a few times, like, you should really consider working at Starbucks, consider working, for one of these bigger chains somewhere. Well, you can get health insurance, and you probably won't get capped at such a low wage. Even when minimum wage went up, they didn't boost my wage to reflect that. So the fact that they had an inside person telling me, go find a job where you will be treated with more respect. It really, in hindsight, of course, always 2020, I probably should have left, but I ended up getting that job at the Starbucks across the street, and I'm sure that drove them crazy.
Yeah, it's so ironic. Like the last thing, I'm not trying to say like, go Starbucks, what a great boss. But I mean, there's something to be said. These and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, that's not to say that big corporations can't be evil bosses. But yeah, sometimes it's just, I guess, to say that small bosses aren't exempt either.
Yeah, they have skeletons in their closet too, that's for sure.
Sure. Okay, well, thanks so much for sharing that. The next, we have Kelsey. Kelsey's going to be sharing a bad boss story.
Yes, thank you so much for having me today, Lisa. I appreciate it. And Cheb as well. So I actually finished high school and I worked for a few different call centers at the time. And in 2010, the summer of 2010, I started as a financial services representative in an entry-level position with one of the major Canadian banks. I started in that position and I quickly was able to reach sales goals and targets. I was able to talk to customers quite easily, and I moved up into a support leader, and then from there a supervisor role with my own team. In about, I would say, just before 2015, I met somebody in the office at work. It's a big center in Halifax, and many people were married to each other and things like that. And I began dating someone else who was employed in the workplace. After about a year of an extremely abusive and toxic relationship that quickly became physically and emotionally abusive, this person started to follow me at work, and it became also a stalking issue outside my house. And I just felt like I could not escape the situation I was in. And I went to a trusted manager that I worked with for 6 years or so at the time. And I, surely didn't want in those types of environments for someone on my team to bring something forward. And I certainly was getting to the point that I was scared for my life and my safety. I ended up with a concussion and in the hospital on an occasion as well. So I told one manager and that I didn't want them to say that I brought anything forward, but just that, people in the building, other employees noticed that this person was approaching me. And I looked upset. So I went to my manager and said, I wanted to leave my personal life at home, but it's actually, he's brought it into the office, and now, I don't feel safe here. So my manager went and talked to them, I think with HR at the time. And when they talked to him, they said that I brought it forward, which immediately I felt in danger, that this person now knew that I had said that this abuse was going on and that I was in this situation, because he would have never thought that I would ever say anything to anyone at the time. So once he found out that I brought it forward, of course, it made my situation much worse. I was dealing with victim services throughout as well. And he began rumors about me in the workplace, one of which that I was a stripper at Ralph's, which was, nothing against exotic dancers, but that wasn't something that I was doing. It was something that was just made up by him. And they believed everything that he said. And it was very clear right away that they did not believe me. And, I understand now why people don't bring certain things forward, even when they are scared for their life. This was a job that I had. I started when I was 18. I moved my way up successfully, although the environment, in call centers can be challenging, to say the least, for sure, especially in sales environments and in, high target environments like that is stressful without, being terrified that something is going to happen in the workplace. He did actually end up getting arrested and was charged, which went on for a long time. And I was working with him. I did eventually ask to be transferred to another location, and that was declined right away. So it was just a terrible experience. I did seek some help, and I actually got in contact with an organization in Halifax that supported me and still support me to this day. And certainly grateful for that. And I did go through an unjust dismissal. I didn't know what I was doing at the beginning. My father helped me, and we went to different lawyers around and really just couldn't get anyone to help me. They thought it was a terrible story, but they weren't willing to go up against this huge corporation. And I did actually get some legal advice, and I was able to go through a case that my lawyer says to this day was a very unfair outcome, to say the least. But I've been dealing with everything since about 2016, when I lost my employment abruptly with that company. I bought my first house by myself when I was just turned 24. And throughout this, it's impacted me mentally, financially. And yeah, I think it's great that you're doing this and that people are able to speak out, and more people should definitely come forward, because I think these things happen a lot more than most people think.
Kelsey, it's like it's hard to even like, process that. It's so much, and I know that there's so much there. It's hard to boil. I think for everyone,
Yes.
it's hard to boil. Take a huge story that is,
Yes.
and like boil it down to like a 5-minute spiel. But
Yeah.
can you? Yeah, I remember when I actually interviewed you, Kelsey, for an article about domestic violence leave, and in that you said you kind of talked about the difficulties of balancing employment with having your physical and mental health tended to. Like, you, on top of dealing with everything you were dealing with and a full-time job, you were also having to attend medical appointments. You were having to seek safety measures. You were having to fear going home. Like, can you just talk about the impact of all of that at the same time, like what that felt like?
Yeah, pretty awful. It takes a toll, I think, on the strongest people, and my job was really important to me. And one of the biggest things that really bothers me to this day is all the rumors, things that were made up, and things that in the call center world in Dartmouth and Halifax, it's a small place, so the rumors spread very quickly, and ruined my reputation with other employers since then, once they've heard certain things. And it came out in their investigation with this bank and my employer that the rumors weren't true. I was investigated through corporate security, and I was being investigated while I was going through work. And I'm actually one of the lucky ones, in one sense, that I worked at a bank, so I did have benefits, and I had short-term disability that I had never used before this, but I did go off. But feeling guilty and being called every day, and being forced to explain what you're going through every day and what's keeping you from the office, when they know that you've pressed charges against this person and you're working with them, sometimes until midnight. I would be the only support leader in the building. So my emotionally, I was scared. I got security to walk me out numerous times. I was actually given a beeper by victim services when I was off work, so I wasn't in the office, and when I was off work, because he was stalking me and being outside my house and at all hours of the night, and just being terrified. So they did give me a beeper after that happened a few times, so that, because they did classify my case as being high risk, which means that you could be in danger of this person killing you or seriously injuring you, even more than I've already been injured. And I did go to the hospital on an occasion when I had to, and it was just horrible. People have to take time off. Anybody in a situation like this, some people, you have your mortgage to pay, you have all these things to pay. And I was fortunate that I had short term, and I can only imagine for people who don't. I mean, the situation was no better when I went back, but you go to the doctor, then I needed to go to victim services. All these things are appointments that take time during business hours. And, you really need to do that, because you need to be safe, and you need to, get support, because even in the legal situation, I never imagined myself in this situation ever. So I was almost even shocked that, this is the situation that I was in. And yeah, it was just horrible. And, to then go to work when they know what's been going on, and for them to, tell me that they believe what he's saying and not me. I was employed there, I think, at least 4 or 5 years longer than he was. It just didn't make sense. And I was just shocked that it went like that, and how quickly, these people were people that I spent time with. I was working, 12-hour days and not getting overtime. I was on salary, and, I worked really, really hard for this company, and I was loyal. And it was just so devastating, all the people that quickly believed him and heard the rumors and, didn't want anything to do with me. And just like that, everything changed.
Wow. like, it sounds like you likely and naturally assumed that the boss would protect you. It was so clearly unfair towards you.
Yeah.
And that, when that didn't happen, you likely assumed that the legal system in place would back you up. And then that didn't happen. And I think it's something that's really important to talk about, is just how difficult justice can be to access.
Yeah.
When it's deprived of you, when you're deprived of justice in your workplace.
Yeah.
And, the fact that they discredited you, let rumors spread about you. And then, I don't know, I mean, there's so much about this story that's so shocking, but the fact that they kind of pinned it, like they made it out to be, or made you out to be unprofessional. Like you were bringing your personal problems to work and you should have known better. And I think that's just such a disgusting attitude.
Yeah. And yeah, exactly. And to that point, bringing your personal issues to work, this person worked with me on the same floor. You can't, in a call center environment, you can't escape that. And, just being terrified, having gone through what I went through, and then still not being able to be safe at work and wanting to work. And yeah, it just became impossible to do. And without, this organization that did help me get a lawyer, this lawyer thought, of course I'll win. And I mean, she was very realistic about what the outcomes could be. And I understood that I could lose for sure, but she was shocked and thought that, the decision was absolutely unfair. And, but I was lucky, because if I didn't, I lost my job abruptly. I was at that time trying not to claim bankruptcy. And, I am fortunate. My parents helped out as much as they could as well. And, I'm fortunate that I didn't lose my home. I had to rent it out for about a year, and I lived with my parents during that time. And for about a year, I was kind of just struggling to pay my mortgage after I lost my job, because I couldn't find anything even close. Because again, I started there when I was 18, or so yeah, it was tough. And I do feel that throughout the way I was let down a lot. And I understand why a lot of people don't bring things forward, because, you don't know what's going to happen. And, my abuser told me numerous times that, he would kill me or ruin my life. And, for a while there, I really felt like, yeah.
Wow. Kelsey, can you tell us what was the organization that helped you?
Equity Watch. I actually read an article in the paper and saw Leanne Tessier's story, and how she was bullied and harassed and just treated horribly. And yeah, at that time, I just felt like, wow, there's so much hope here that, people are speaking out. And I contacted them, and I went to meetings. And yeah, I've been a part of their steering committee for a while now as well. I actually joined, lost my job in 2016, but it was, I believe, early 2018 when I got involved with Equity Watch, and they began, and they do some great stuff here in Halifax for sure.
That's awesome. It's so great that there are organizations out there that can help. And I can also somehow at the end maybe share an article, a link to Leanne Tessier's story.
That would be great.
Another bad boss story that helped change happen. And I think sometimes the justice system is so unfair. I think many of us here even have witnessed that or experienced that ourselves. And in a sense, I almost wonder if going out, like speaking out, going to the media, if it's accessible to you and possible. It sometimes seems like it's a quicker way to justice, and it hits the boss where it hurts. Whereas going through these long administrative procedures that sort of optically look like they're in place to support us as workers, but actually do the opposite, can be taxing emotionally, financially, etc. And
Yeah.
Kelsey, your story just totally highlights that. And there's one other thing I was gonna.
I think too as well. If I didn't see that article and hear so much about Equity Watch, because at the time, I found a job just locally, and I think I was making $12 an hour. So I went from, it was really hard. But if I didn't read that article, and if Equity Watch wasn't there, I wouldn't have been able to get in touch with a lawyer who took my case because they heard my story and, truly thought, this is terrible. And these things happen all the time in workplaces, and huge corporations get away with it because they have so much money and power. And someone like me who, didn't know the law side of it, was going around talking to lawyers and trying to call places. And looking up things online 24/7, just trying to figure out what I can do because I knew what happened was so wrong, that there must be something I can do. And I'm very thankful that I did get in contact with them and to be on the steering committee today as well, to hopefully be able to help someone else in the future would be awesome. But the legal system and the justice system is so, I went through it because I charged my abuser eventually when it went on for so long. And I also went through unjust dismissal. And if I did not have a lawyer, someone who just got fired is not going to be able to pay their bills and pay for legal advice or to pay for anybody to really help them in any substantial way. These processes take years, and it is confusing. It is set up for failure. But of course, a company who has tons of big, huge lawyers on their side, they don't care. And, they don't have to because of how it's set up.
Exactly.
And it's really unfair because I know that there's probably so many other people that would be in my situation or similar situations. I've heard a lot of stories over the years as well that just are, appalling. And what can you do, right, to help? And it's really hard, and things need to change.
For sure. And I think it's interesting. You have Joanna, who was working for a very small company that was still kind of throwing their weight around and saying, like, look, you take this to the labor board, we have people there. Like, this isn't going to go anywhere. This is a small employer that doesn't have the legal, like the financial resources of a major Canadian bank. But then in your case, you can just kind of see that regardless of the company's size, they're always or almost always in a position of power for their workers.
And even a small employer, would know how challenging it is. And there were so many times in the last, I just lost just in the end, just before Christmas that just passed. So, but throughout the year, like the few years since 2016, it's like throughout the way, there's so many things that you just don't understand. It went on for almost a year that the bank argued that the adjudicator that was appointed to us from a case he had, 10 or 15 years earlier, they didn't want him to adjudicate. So for a year, and this is before I even got involved with Equity Watch, I'm seeing all these emails going from the lawyers or from, the bank's lawyer and the adjudicator, and all this legal stuff is going on that I have no idea what is going on. And then, of course, the bank won that and got appointed a different adjudicator that they were then happy with. So the whole process is just really unfair. And I would have, if I didn't have a lawyer that was willing to do this, taking the risk that they may not get anything at the end of this. In reality, if I didn't have that, with my family's support and everything that I had going for me, it would have been over probably the first year, just because I didn't know. And I was up against numerous lawyers that knew everything to.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I thank you so much for sharing your story. And I wanted to just say, Equity Watch is Nova Scotia based. There are resources for workers, and every, employment legislation is almost always for most workers provincial. So there are several provincial organizations that work on these kinds of things, but unfortunately often they're not enough. They're working alone without a lot of financial support to do the important work of helping workers who can't afford lawyers, and Equity Watch them for people in Nova Scotia. Before I move on, Kelsey, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
Because you were terminated, and this is something that that has come up with conversations I've had with other workers as well. Because you were terminated, as unfair as that was, your record of employment showed that your boss had terminated your employment. And so when you sought employment at another call center, they after the 3-month probationary period, they asked for your record of employment, which you provided. When they saw that your last employment had ended with a your last employer had ended your relationship like through a termination,
Yeah.
fired. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. I've had a few situations over the last few years that this has impacted me so that the job didn't work out. It was actually a temp agency that hired me, and I worked for 6 months for another call center in Halifax, and again, not making near what I was making prior to being terminated, but you got to start over somewhere. So I started there, and after 6 months of successful employment, I got a call on the Monday morning while I was driving into the office that I was not to return. And that was the temp agency that called me, because after 6 months of working with the temp agency, the call center had an opportunity to hire us on full time, or if they weren't satisfied with us, they could let us go at any time throughout that 6 months. So I was aware of that. And at the 6-month mark, they asked for our record of employment. So if I would have said no, they're not going to keep me because I'm trying to hide something. And I was honest about not being terminated, but I was honest about that I worked there, and I did put them on my resume because, that was almost 7 years of employment. And when I was 18. So of course, after that, finding a job and having a 7-year gap on your resume and not being in school is hard to explain with no experience trying to get a job here. So I was driving into work, and they called me and said that, and they didn't give a reason because they didn't have to. I did speak to the supervisor afterwards because I was again shocked that happened. I couldn't believe that, even now, it's impacting my life.
Yeah.
And my reputation. They destroyed my reputation, and they let horrible rumors spread around, and they gave no consequences to these people that spread them. And even when they investigated me, there was no apology. There was no, oh, we knew you better than that. Like, I was shocked that they even believed that I was, that all these horrible rumors were in fact true. But
Yeah.
it affects me to this day trying to find a job, and only having mainly call center experience, and it's really tough. And I've lost jobs because my record of employment shows I'm terminated. And at the start of this, all I wanted really was an apology, and for them to acknowledge that, how they treated me was horrible, and that they really let me down. And I wanted my record of employment to be changed so that I could move forward with my life from this horrible experience, and they would not do that.
So much material and struggle there. I just want to take a pause. Chebs, how are you feeling? All these bad boss stories.
Wow, it's really it's heart-wrenching to hear. Some part of me thinks, part of it is life. We go through life, we have these experiences, some positive, some negative, but they all shape who we end up being. But it's pretty devastating to hear, because a very key part of our life is livelihood. So working for a livelihood, earning a good, honest wage. And, it's just devastating that in a society that is very capitalist driven, you end up with people who are willing to work, want to do the work, have the experience to do the work, and then they end up being in a situation which is not really about their ability to do the work or anything about their work, but other things that employers might fail to deal with that then has a profound impact on their lives, right? That's just the harsh reality in an already harsh capitalist system that we exist in. So it almost, I'm just sitting here listening and thinking, the laborers got to get together to stop such things from happening. And I don't know, in North America, Labor Day is in September, but for those of us who have an international background, actually May 1st is Labor Day from many places where we come from. So it puts that context that we are talking about this in the backdrop of Labor Day. And what that leads me to think is that, we the people, the laborers, need to, we need to do more so that we can put in place those systems like Kelsey was saying, when she had all these troubles, she didn't, she had a hard time finding the support systems to help her navigate. So it seems to me, whether it's legal assistance for people in those predicaments, we have legal aid. You've talked a lot about the justice system. We have legal aid that helps people for criminal matters, other kinds of matters. But it seems to me that we might need, something like legal aid that helps people. Employment is so core to our existence. So you don't want to be in that position and have no help, no hope, nobody to turn around and lean on.
Absolutely. And I think it's important, I don't know, in my opinion, like legal aid is support navigating an unfair legal system. But the thing is like, regardless of whether you're supported or not supported, the system is often just totally rigged against workers. Best case scenario, you have some support. These processes are convoluted. They're meant to be intimidating. If you have support, it basically means you can learn with someone holding your hand how unfair the system is. I know that sounds very cynical, and it's not to say that like, absolutely use the resources that are available to you. All I'm saying is though that we also need to work for improved employment legislation to make things fairer for workers. So I want to move on. Charlie's bad boss story is rare because, and I wanted to end on a positive note because it actually ends positively. When I got into workers' rights and employment and things like that, I was finishing my degree at Queen's University, and our labor course, part of the curriculum was actually studying a cafe and the success story of baristas organizing for change. When I moved to Halifax, I went into the cafe and I realized, I was like, oh my gosh, this is the cafe that I had studied in my labor class. It's a really compelling story. So Charlie, can you tell us what happened with your bad?
Hey, yeah. I just wanted to thank Johanna and Kelsey for sharing your stories. They're very hard and heavy, and you were treated vilely. And yeah, I'm very sorry that happened. And I wanted to thank Chebs and Lisa for having me on. Yeah, my story is a bit different because it does end with a win. So I am grateful for that. But it sort of started back in 2012. I started working at the same location that I am. It's been through a few different business changes. And in 2013, we unionized the cafe. And that was under a different company than the Bad Boss story. And then in 2017, they sold it to this person who just like gave you bad vibes right away. You were just like, this guy is a slimy businessman and we are in for trouble. I just knew right away. Yeah, and it was a couple months of like everything's like kind of okay. He's kind of hands off. He has a few locations. But then our checks started bouncing. So we were used to, like, in our collective agreement, we had it so that they had to pay via direct deposit, and also that we were supposed to get healthcare benefits. And so when the business was sold to them, they were supposed to like, they inherited the collective agreement and the union and everything that came with that. And he like pretended to buy us healthcare benefits. He like gave us he like held a meeting with a health insurance broker with us, and we're like, ask him questions. And then he just we'd follow up with emails, phone calls, and he would just say, oh, it's on its way. And then, when our checks would bounce, he would be like, he'd be like, oh, sorry about that. Like, there was just a mishap with the bank. He had a million excuses for the reasons why our checks would bounce. And he'd always replace it and eventually pay us back, sometimes by e-transfer. There were other times that he paid some workers in cash. And then yeah, we stopped getting paid fully. Intermittently, some folks sort of stopped being paid fully, but we filed grievances with the union. We were like going through those routes, but we're low-wage service workers, and for us to actually survive our checks bouncing wasn't feasible for us to wait around for grievance processes. Like Kelsey was saying, legal processes can take for like a few years, or many years in some cases, but in union situations, this stuff can take months, which is better than years, but it's also way too long for food service workers. So we decided that we were going to take our grievances to the press. We held press conferences, and we picketed his businesses. And yeah, eventually we had to go through the grievance process in arbitration. And yeah, he just like, it was just really an awful experience, because he was on stand for many days, because he doesn't know how to speak concisely, but then his lawyer, also his wife was on the stand, and to like sort of get sympathy from the arbitrator, they said they had to sell their family gold to pay off their debts, and that was somehow our fault. And so there were receipts of like many thousands of dollars worth of gold, and not just like priced for this, like, is a beautiful piece of jewelry. It was literally by weight, and it was like in the tens of thousands worth of gold. But yeah, it was a wild experience. and he still owes everybody who worked at that location over $10,000. He was ordered to pay everybody back. So we won in theory, but he just refuses to pay. We're at the bottom of a long list of people he owes money to. And he owes people like hundreds of thousands of dollars, between businesses and landlords and workers. And yeah, so obviously this like took a terrible toll on all of our mental health, because we're like working full time and also like taking this to the press and organizing all the time. And it's exhausting. It's hard to pay for your bills. Like, you can't take care of your health. And there were like some stories of folks that somebody who worked at a different location said that she wasn't her like checks kept bouncing, and so the bank was like, if you have one more check that bounces, we're gonna have to close your account. And she was like, that's the only account I have, and I have to pay rent. And she called the boss and said this to him, and was like, is it okay if I like take money from the till tonight, because I can't pay for my rent and I can't buy groceries? Like, what am I gonna do? She didn't have a credit card. She was in a very tough spot. And he said, yeah, it's fine. And then he had security cameras, and then he like called back after she left and took some money and said, I'm gonna call the cops because you stole money from my business. And she was like, but you said I could. And he's like, no, I didn't say that. So he was just a real slippery guy.
I mean, there's so many parts of this that are outrageous. The weighing of gold, even being like,
I know. I know.
It's crazy.
Right.
They are like
wild.
Words like, we're dealing with this in pounds of gold. Like, give me a break. What?
Yeah. It's like, cry me a river. But I wish I had pounds of gold to like help me get by.
Oh my gosh, it's so bad. And when you say $10,000, does that mean that you are, just so that I'm clear and everyone's clear, does that mean that you're each owed $10,000, or that collectively there's $10,000 owed to employees?
Well, so there were like six different locations. At our location in total, I think about 9 of us were owed in total about $10,000, a little bit over. Yeah.
Just thinking about time, I want to open it up. Charlie, though, before we move on really quickly, you're now in what is called a unionized worker co-op. So this is both a co-op and it's unionized. I don't know if there's a way of describing that in a way that's like not too technical, but I'm just so that people know what that like how that operates. You're voting on things together?
Yeah. So eventually the store got closed down on him. And our coffee supplier said, you guys should open as a worker-owned co-op. And called our union the day after they changed the locks. And we got together and said, that would be great. And the union provided a bit of money for us to do that. So yeah, all of the workers there became members. And then we all get to vote on the big decisions. And we try to open up the floor to everyone to voice their opinions on things that are obviously going to matter to our livelihood and to our working conditions.
That's awesome. You really overthrew the boss, and there's so much to learn there, which is why I love this story so much. Is again, it can be pretty doom and gloom when you're just talking to workers about their bad bosses, but knowing that someone has done, did what it took to overthrow a bad boss is so encouraging. I don't know. I just wanted to check in. Chebs, is it supposed to end at 4, or can we open up to a couple very general questions quickly? We covered a lot already, so I think either way.
No, Lisa, we're good to carry on. If we have more to share, because I imagine that our viewers want to hear some discussion after we've heard the story. So we're good to carry on for as long as our guest can stay.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I did want to ask, just sort of opening it up, what do you all think? And I don't think that there's a right answer. I think there are many answers to this question. It's not an easy one. I've struggled with it. What do you think about the possibility of a good boss? Is it even possible? And I'd ask all of you, including Chebs.
Yeah, and I just want to throw onto that a little thing is that, because just thinking of, I'm thinking more about the people who are watching or the viewers, because for us, you've shared your experiences. I imagine that you also have experiences of good bosses that you could share, but because we're not in that conversation. So with Lisa's question, it's a little bit nuanced, because, a bad boss could also be good at times, but bad most of the times. So how do you, I guess I'm just trying to get to Lisa's question is, when do you come down to the point where you're like, all right, this ain't good for me, because it's all about relationships, and it could go up and down, so and it's also part of that cycle of abuse, because it could be good at times and bad most of the times, because it's part of that cycle. But how do you unpack all of these different things to understand that you're really in a bad predicament?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interested in any of your thoughts on that.
I definitely think that it's possible to have a good boss. I think really depends on the sector you're in and how much transparency there is in the system that you're working in, the field that you're working in. I think it's very hard at like kind of the retail service industry level, especially we were saying before, comparing small businesses and big corporations. Depending on what that business is, sometimes it is very transparent. Sometimes you have a very good system in place to support workers. Sometimes it's easy to deal with a bad manager. I'm very grateful that where I'm at now, I love my bosses. I see very little of them for the most part, but they're there when I need them. They trust me. But a lot of that also comes from, I'm doing a PhD now. Before doing that, I did my master's here, and we developed a relationship when I was a student doing that. So it's kind of a completely different system. It might be different when I move on past that. If I'm doing a postdoc position in another institution, it might not end up being the same. But where I'm at now, I love my bosses, and I know that there are like greater department heads and stuff who I don't see at all, who I know have some say in decisions related to things like my pay and how many hours I work. But having a boss who trusts you is huge, and that is great for your mental health. You're more likely to be very productive. I know I still have this very irrational fear of being fired to this day, even though I never really did anything wrong the first time. And I remember telling my boss I was going to have all these things done by August. And I ended up getting like half of one of those things done. And she was just like, okay, well, that's great. And I said, you're not going to fire me? And she just kind of laughed. And she's like, oh my God, you're serious? Like, no, like no one's going to fire you for like that of all things. And it's, knowing that you can have conversations with them, but it's like I said, it's different for me being in a university where I think things are a lot more transparent, and also in Finland, in a country that's got a very good social welfare system in place. So it's kind of sad that I've had to move across the world in order to escape it, but I'm grateful for what I have here.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that too. I certainly think it is, you are the bosses make the work environment as well, right? And if you have a strong leader that, you know, you trust and they're honest to you, and you know, I certainly think with integrity and things, there can be good bosses. I've had lots of good bosses over the years as well, so I can certainly agree with a lot of that too, Joanna.
And it's funny, I've noticed one similarity, I mean, between our stories, not that there's a lot going on there. What you went through is horrible, but we both just wanted an apology at the end of the day. We weren't asking for, you know, lots of money compensation. We were just asking for some sort of admittance that they had screwed up and that they were wrong for having put us in that terrible situation. And that was too much for them. And people like that should not be allowed to own businesses. It makes me sick that I'm pretty sure they still do own businesses, and I feel for the people who probably still work for them. But yeah, the fact that all we wanted was an apology, and that was too much.
And I think too, and you know, I think Charlie, that's so cool what you guys, you know, what you guys accomplished and how you were able to, you know, have the Glitter Bean Cafe, and that's such an awesome story. I really enjoyed hearing it. And I think too, where there is such hierarchy in organizations, it's hard because, you know, I remember sometimes coming in a room, even when I had my own team and I was the supervisor in the same organization that I was just talking about at that bank, and how people would all of a sudden almost stop talking. And it was a toxic environment. I had a manager, you know, there even before this situation happened, who I felt like I was always walking on eggshells and I really couldn't trust them. And it was, you know, there would be people gossiping. And I think that environment, you know, it was allowed to happen and people just accepted it because we had a good job with benefits. And, you know, I made a good income for my age and for, you know, where I wanted to be in my life. And it was just so devastating to lose that. But I certainly still have hope. I've had good experiences with supervisors. I've had, you know, I have supervisor experience, and I always try to be empathetic and, you know, put myself in someone else's shoes and, you know, be honest and open with people. And I think, you know, no matter the environment, you have a way to be transparent that we are all, you know, in this together and the same goal in mind, and treat each other fairly is not, with respect and dignity, is not very much to ask from your employer that, you know, we give so much to. You know, we are at work. I was at work much more than I was ever, you know, at home at the time. And I feel like we almost walk on eggshells because, you know, am I going to get another opportunity like this? There was so many situations that I just kind of let happen, or I'd go home and, you know, completely break down at the end of the day and then go back in and do it all over again. And it was tough. And it certainly wasn't great up until this experience that I had. But, you know, I look back now and it's like, you know, there were so many things that truly were not okay.
Yeah, like I kind of almost feel like, you know, yes, like Chebs, you said, these are personal relationships, this is life, and that is true. And I think though, and so you're always dealing with just personalities, and can you have a positive relationship with someone? Yes. Can you have a positive relationship with your boss? Yes, I think that that's possible. But when I think what's so difficult about traditional unionized employment especially is that there's always that potential for abuse. Like whether your boss, you know, your boss can have enormous amounts of power and not abuse it. The threat is that as things are currently, that power is there in their hands and it's always able to be abused. And I, at least that's, I mean, Chebs posed that question to me and it really stumped me. Is there such thing as a good boss? But that's at least I just think, yeah, it's possible to have a nice relationship with someone, but we all go into work knowing that that fundamentally it's insecure, I think. And I think that insecurity is actually what makes employment what it is. I think it's actually kind of vital to capitalism, is to make workers feel insecure. Charlie, what do you think? Is a good boss? I mean, you're kind of your own like boss now, you and your coworkers, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I was gonna say something similar to what you said. Like, definitely there are bosses that can create good working conditions for their workers. I am my own boss, but I also am a boss, because the nature of workers-owned co-ops is that anybody who starts working at your location isn't forced to become a member. So it's voluntary. So we do have like a couple of employees who aren't members yet. Yeah, so, before I probably just would have straight up said no. But I definitely we work to put in the effort to include people's voices and to, and to not exploit people. But definitely there always is that, like, everybody who comes into a workplace has other workplace traumas and knows, like, at any point I could be fired for any reason, and like without a union, there's like nothing really in place to that, like, for especially for service workers who are low waged, like accessing a lawyer is out of question. But yeah. So it's definitely complicated. It's hard to have a good boss under capitalism. I think that definitely workers should be in control of their workplaces, because the nature of the relationship between bosses and workers, it is inherently exploitative.
Yeah, totally. It's so and like all of your stories are so different, and there's this common thread though of bad bosses. Like you said, Charlie, that everyone's coming into new jobs with trauma, and I think that's honestly a good word. I think I've had workplace trauma. It sounds like we all have. Chebs, have you ever had? Do you carry workplace trauma as well?
Yes, actually, that's a good word to use, because I was just thinking in my mind as you used that, a question that I was going to pose to the group about workplace trauma. I have certainly experienced that. My job is a little bit different now, in the sense that perhaps the trauma is not necessarily created by the employer or so, but just from the nature of the job. And just for the benefit of the other panelists, I'm a lawyer, so a lot of things that I do might involve dealing with, whether it's with people who have experienced certain trauma, and then vicariously you sort of become part of that as you help them, or just from the things that you engage with. But so I got two quick questions. I wanted to find out what Johanna's thesis is about, or her dissertation, or what is her doctoral about. And the other thing I wanted to talk about is practically, because Charlie talked about the fact that service workers, in an incredible sense, especially the fact that we're living through a pandemic, and we have all seen the value of service workers, but yet we have a society that tends to not value that work in the way that it should be. And if anything, for anybody who didn't understand that, this pandemic could have been a big teacher in terms of understanding the value of service workers. So I wanted to ask, what is it that we can do to ensure that service workers have that extra cushion or layer of support, because I'll use a good quick example. You know, at the height of the pandemic last year, you heard about all these retail services who were making huge sums of money because everybody was, buying for home and everything. But then they paid their workers, they gave them a little bit of bonuses. And then by the time we got to the fall, they were taking away these bonuses. And I was scratching my head saying, what? Like, this doesn't make sense. Why wouldn't you just leave this as a permanent increase? Not just valuing the work that has been done through the pandemic, but seeing the value using the prism of the pandemic of what this work really means to the society. So I just wanted to ask you, what can be done? How can we organize, apart from, the pot clapping and the more aesthetic things that we do to say we support service workers? What substantially can be done?
Did you want me to answer, or did you want Johanna to answer?
You can go ahead. It might be fresher. That was a long question. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm just, please, anybody.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, I think like workers have to organize in their workplaces. Like you have to organize there. It's like where people have control over what's happening in society the most. And I think like the easiest way to do that, I say easiest, is still pretty hard, is to organize a union. Definitely unions could be doing more and could be doing better, but the only way for that to happen is actually to just have more workers getting involved in their unions and doing more, and listening, and just sort of like figuring out what are the ways that we can be in solidarity with each other, and what are the ways that we can work together. Like I think that I think you're absolutely right. It's disgusting that those workplaces, the grocery stores, gave food service workers a menial raise for working in a pandemic, and then took it away, even though they're making millions of dollars. And they easily could have kept up with that wage. And to call people service workers heroes and to not give them pay accordingly is abhorrent. Like it's disgusting. Yeah, and so I think definitely organizing is very, very, very essential to workers fighting back and getting more of what they deserve. Yeah, and I really hoped to see more organizing in this pandemic. It's an interesting place to be working at a workers owned co-op, because I have to like be caring about a business all the time, and whereas before I would have been organizing in my union all the time. So that's another predicament about our situation, is that I don't have as much energy to commit to doing that necessary work. So part of me is like, oh, I wish I were in a workplace like that right now, because I would be like organizing so hard for it, because I think that that's what people have to do.
If I could answer your question now, it's not entirely disconnected from what had happened. I had when I had that job, I was doing a Bachelor of Music at Queen's, and I had taken a semester off because I knew I had terrible performance anxiety, and I didn't want to be a classical musician. But during that whole situation, music was a huge comfort to me. I was playing a lot of piano. I still had a great support system with my profs there, even though I wasn't actively enrolled in school at the time. And I became really interested in music and how we associate them with memories and music and nostalgia. And I am currently writing my thesis on the perceptual effects and emotional effects of music videos. I'm really interested in like audio visual pairings in particular, but my dissertation is on how having some visual accompaniment to your music listening experience can influence not only how you perceive the music in that moment, but even going forwards, whether it's in visual mental imagery, what you think about when you're listening to the music, or just how you perceive the affective quality, the emotional nature of the music, or the meaning behind it, how that changes, and a lot of relationships between those outcomes and mental health outcomes. So generally, people who are more depressed actually tend to rely on music more to regulate their emotions compared to people who tend to be more mentally healthy. They don't necessarily rely on music as much for such emotional heavy purposes.
Johanna, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to rope you into coming to have another episode with us to talk about what you just said, because that just seems so profound to me. But
I'm very lucky that I'm here doing that. We have a very great Center for Interdisciplinary Music Research here in Jyväskylä in Finland. And I work with some incredibly talented, incredibly bright people, neuroscientists, psychologists. I actually share an office with a Canadian music therapist who is just one of the sweetest people I've ever met. So it's a really interesting place to work. We're a music department with a lot of brain equipment, which is interesting. So yeah, it's I'm very lucky that I am where I am. I found a very interesting place to do research. So yeah, always happy to talk about it. I'm sure my bosses would be too.
Excellent. Well, Lisa, back to you.
Sure. This has been so incredible, and also just watching you all connect with each other, and like, I think Bad Bosses are such a way of bringing people together and getting into some pretty intimate details. We all shared with, I know each of you, but you didn't know each other when you came, and you all shared so much together. And I think that's like really, really beautiful and kind of what I hope for. So that's awesome. So I want to thank everyone for coming, to each of our speakers for sharing their story. And I hope that this has helped listeners feel less alone. I want to say to people that if you want to join the Bad Boss conversation, to please email your story to info@mybadboss.ca or reach out via social media. I got a website set up. I'm new at this, but you can now submit your boss story via our website, which is mybadboss.ca. And I want to tell everyone that there is no such thing as a bad boss story. Obviously some are more intense, some are, some are funny, some can be really, really sad, but if you want to join the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. And also, if you can follow us on social media just to keep up to date as more stories flood in. I only started this, I think, like 2 or 3 months ago, and I'm getting emails from strangers almost every day with theirs. So there's lots to read. Also, I wanted to say that so many people are afraid to come forward. And so if you don't want your first name attributed to your story, just let me know in advance, and we can either use a pseudonym or just go by anonymous. This is going to be shared via social media, so and also posted on YouTube, correct, Chebs?
Yes, so this will be, this is recording live on Facebook right now, and it's going to be posted to our channel on YouTube. And listen, thank you all for being such incredible guests and for digging deep and sharing your stories. I actually would love to have, I know you're Lisa's friends, and so I would love for us to have conversations about other things, because it seems like there's a lot we could talk about, just about life, to sharing these stories, definitely help other people. But that's what this platform is all about at Unfiltered. Is trying to have those conversations that people don't have a lot of or don't do more of, just so that we can have a really progressive society. So feel free to reach out to Lisa, or if you want to come on the show, have conversations. We have very interesting conversations on the show. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Chebs. This
Yeah, and so please, I'm just gonna do what Lisa just did. So mybadboss.ca, that is the URL for anything Bad Bosses. They are on Instagram. That's the website. I don't know if you have a Facebook page, Lisa.
I do. I need to find a way to streamline this. It's pretty amateur, but I need to upload more stories onto the Facebook page. The Instagram is the most active for sure. There's
Right.
also a Twitter, but easiest and the most active is Instagram so far.
Okay. So check us all out. Check out mybadboss.ca. Check out My Bad Boss on Instagram, Facebook. Check out Unfiltered. We are on YouTube as at Chebs McFarlane. And I'm gonna post this edition of the show for anybody who missed it, so they can rewatch it. And certainly, definitely, I'm gonna be telling you that we're gonna try to get back these panelists on other discussions subsequently. So thank you all. Have a lovely, lovely Sunday evening. And for my friend in Europe, have a good night. And have a great week ahead, all of you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. It was good to meet you.
Good to meet everyone. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye.
Bye. And so, ladies and gentlemen, next week we're gonna have another conversation, another episode of the show coming up next week. And I honestly forget what's upcoming, but rest assured, I'm going to be putting out a flyer at the start of the week here for you. We've been talking to a lot of people who want to come on the shows. That's the only reason why I'm not remembering exactly who, but I think we've lined up a good number of guests and shows and topics to discuss here at Unfiltered, carrying us for the rest. And my co-host Wes is going to be coming on. We have some great things planned for you. So that being said, please, as we sign off, share our videos, subscribe to our YouTube page. It's one click and you're subscribed. Encourage others to join us and watch the shows when we do have them every Sunday at 4 p.m. And we love you for supporting this platform. And we will continue to bring you very, very poignant conversations and ones that can help you as you navigate life. So thank you very much. And I'm signing off here right now. This is Unfiltered. Chebs McFarlane, your co-host for today. Have a good weekend. Yeah, Chebs McFarlane, welcome to Unfiltered. I'm your host here, Chebs McFarlane. Welcome to Unfiltered.